5 years ago, I walked down the aisle with Brian Coleman, a man who carried himself like he owned the world. To everyone else, he was successful, charming, and ambitious, a self-made businessman destined for greatness. But behind closed doors, he treated me as though my existence was merely decorative, a trophy wife whose only purpose was to smile politely at his business dinners and nod along to conversations far beyond my comprehension, or so he thought. My literature degree became a punchline in our home, something he dismissed with a patronizing chuckle whenever it came up. "Your books are nice bedtime stories," he'd say, waving off any attempt I made to engage him on topics that didn't revolve around profit margins or tax codes. He truly believed I was too simple-minded to grasp the complexities of his empire. What Brian failed to realize was that while he saw me as an unassuming woman lost in fictional worlds, those very novels had taught me how to observe patterns, analyze behavior, and recognize deceit. Every time he left financial documents lying around, every casual conversation about questionable deals conducted over dinner, it all painted a picture I couldn't ignore. At first, I documented these moments out of sheer disbelief, wanting proof that I wasn't imagining his condescension or the growing unease in our marriage. But then, late one night, as I listened to him discuss falsifying invoices on a phone call from the next room, a chilling clarity struck me. This wasn't just arrogance. It was criminality cloaked in confidence. That's when my quiet observations turned into something more deliberate. Each word, each transaction, each careless remark became ammunition, not just against him, but against the toxic narrative he forced upon me. Little did he know, the simple wife he underestimated would soon become his greatest reckoning. It was a rainy Tuesday, 14 months ago, when the final piece of Brian's betrayal revealed itself. He had left his laptop open while taking a shower, and a notification popped up on the screen. "Vanessa." My heart stopped as I read the preview. "Last night was amazing. Can't wait to see you again when she's visiting her parents." Vanessa Miller, his sister's best friend. The same woman who hugged me warmly at every family gathering, who laughed at my jokes, who asked about my book club selections. Trembling, I clicked the message thread, each word more damning than the last. Photos, intimate texts, plans made behind my back, all carefully timed during weekends I spent visiting my sister or attending academic conferences. Brian had written, "She doesn't suspect a thing. Too busy with her books to notice the real world around her." I took screenshots, my hands shaking but resolute, adding them to the growing dossier of evidence against him. What struck me most wasn't just the betrayal. It was how meticulously he underestimated me. He thought I was too absorbed in literature to recognize deceit. Instead, those novels taught me to spot foreshadowing, to see patterns others missed. That night, something inside me shifted. This wasn't just about hurt pride anymore. It was ammunition. When Brian emerged from the shower, towel around his waist, I greeted him with the same practiced smile I'd perfected over 5 years. But beneath that smile burned a quiet determination. Every message, every photo, would help dismantle the empire he believed untouchable. By morning, I had encrypted the files and stored backups in 3 separate locations. Little did Brian know, his simple wife had already begun planning his downfall. The day I decided to contact Andrea Blackwell, my hands trembled, not from fear, but from the weight of what I was about to set in motion. It was a crisp autumn afternoon when I walked into her office, clutching a folder filled with years of painstakingly gathered evidence. Andrea had been an acquaintance from college, but now she was someone far more important, a lawyer specializing in divorce and financial crimes. "It's for research," I lied smoothly during our initial meeting, pretending to write a novel about white-collar crime. But Andrea's sharp eyes saw through me almost immediately. Still, she played along, answering my hypothetical questions with professional precision while subtly probing for truth. By our 3rd coffee date, I revealed enough for her to understand this wasn't fiction, it was survival. Andrea helped me organize everything. Transcripts of Brian's incriminating conversations, copies of falsified documents, even the timestamps of his late-night calls with Vanessa. But it wasn't until we discovered the discrepancies in our prenuptial agreement that things truly escalated. The forensic accountant Andrea referred me to found alterations made after I'd signed, clauses inserted without my knowledge, rendering me financially powerless if the marriage ended. This revelation fueled my resolve. Yet, just as I thought I had everything under control, disaster struck. The USB drive containing the most critical evidence, the original version of the altered prenup, suddenly corrupted. My heart sank as hours of work seemed lost forever. For 2 sleepless nights, I scoured forums and tutorials, learning data recovery techniques. Finally, using specialized software, I managed to salvage fragments of the files. Each recovered byte felt like reclaiming a piece of myself. When I handed Andrea the reconstructed evidence, she nodded approvingly. "This is gold," she said, her voice low but firm. "With this, we can dismantle his entire empire." Her confidence steadied me, but the stakes were higher than ever. Every step forward came with risks. Brian grew suspicious of my late-night activities, and once, he nearly caught me transferring files. Still, I pressed on, knowing the endgame was near. Little did he know, the wife he dismissed as too simple had become his greatest threat. 2 days before the anniversary dinner, my phone buzzed incessantly with notifications, texts from unknown numbers, missed calls at odd hours, and apps behaving strangely. At first, I dismissed it as a glitch, but a nagging feeling in my gut told me otherwise. Brian had been unusually attentive that week, asking where I was going and what I was doing with an edge of forced casualness. It wasn't until I noticed a faint green dot blinking on my phone's screen, even when no apps were open, that I realized the truth. He'd installed spyware. My stomach churned as I understood the implications. Every text, every email, every move I made could be monitored. I couldn't panic, not yet. Instead, I retrieved an old flip phone I'd kept hidden in the back of my closet, buried beneath layers of sweaters. The device was ancient, but its simplicity made it untraceable. Using cash I'd stashed months ago, I purchased a prepaid SIM card from a gas station miles away. That night, under the dim light of my bedside lamp, I created a new email account using a random string of letters and numbers. Every keystroke felt like it echoed in the silence, each click a potential trigger for discovery. I forwarded critical files to this new address, ensuring they were stored safely in multiple locations. Then came the message from Vanessa, a single line that chilled me to my core. "Stop digging, Marissa. You don't know what you're messing with." Her words dripped with thinly veiled menace, but beneath them lay something else, fear. She knew I was onto them. I stared at the screen, my pulse pounding in my ears, and deleted the message immediately. For a moment, doubt crept in. What if I'd underestimated how far they'd go to protect their secrets? But then I remembered the years of humiliation, the nights spent recording his voice, the painstaking documentation, all leading up to this point. The next morning, I deliberately left my compromised phone on the kitchen counter while I stepped out to grab coffee. When I returned, Brian glanced at it idly, seemingly satisfied. He didn't notice the small USB drive tucked into my pocket, the one containing everything he thought he'd hidden so well. As I smiled sweetly at him, pretending nothing was amiss, I felt a surge of quiet power. The game wasn't over, but the pieces were falling into place. And for the first time, I knew I held all the cards. The air in the Magnolia room hung thick with tension as Brian stood, champagne flute in hand, his confident smile radiating arrogance. The room had fallen silent, all eyes on him as he prepared to deliver what he thought would be a clever toast. 5 years ago, he began, his voice dripping with mockery. I made what my friends called the safest bet of my career, marrying a quiet literature professor who preferred fictional worlds over real ones. He paused for effect, scanning the room with that familiar smirk. Who knew that my simple wife would turn out to be, well, just that, a gold-digging nobody? His laugh echoed through the room, but it was met with uneasy chuckles from guests who shifted uncomfortably in their seats. My heart pounded, but I remained composed, my hands resting lightly on the table. This was it, the moment I'd been waiting for. As Brian sat down, still smirking, I rose slowly, the folder in my hand feeling like both a weapon and a shield. "I'd like to respond to that lovely toast," I said, my voice calm, yet carrying an edge that silenced any lingering murmurs. Brian's smirk faltered slightly, but he leaned back in his chair, clearly expecting some petty retort. Instead, I slid the folder across the table toward him. "Funny you should mention assets," I continued, my tone icy. "This fake prenup you altered after I signed it? It means you get nothing. His face paled as he flipped open the folder, revealing forensic evidence of the fraudulent document. Before he could react, I pulled out my phone and tapped the screen. And speaking of assets, I added, my voice cutting through the growing unease in the room. Those texts with Vanessa, they've just gone to everyone here. Phones began chiming simultaneously, the sharp sounds slicing through the stunned silence. Guests glanced at their screens, shock registering on their faces as explicit messages and photos lit up their devices. Before anyone could process what was happening, the lights flickered violently. A deafening clap of thunder shook the building as the storm outside intensified, plunging the room into darkness. Panic rippled through the crowd, cries of alarm mixing with the sound of chairs scraping against the floor. In the chaos, I heard a sudden gasp followed by a thud. Turning toward the commotion, I saw Brian's mother collapse, her hand clutching her chest. "Call 911, someone shouted, their voice barely audible over the din. Waiters scrambled to bring emergency lighting, casting eerie shadows across the room. Through the pandemonium, Brian's voice cut through sharply. "What have you done?" he hissed, grabbing my arm with desperate force. His once cocky demeanor had crumbled, replaced by raw fury. "You think this little performance makes you powerful? When this is over, you'll have nothing." His words were meant to intimidate, but they only fueled my resolve. For 5 years, I had lived under his condescension, his manipulation, his lies. Now, standing amidst the wreckage of his carefully constructed facade, I felt something I hadn't allowed myself to feel in years: freedom. As paramedics rushed in to tend to Brian's mother, Andrea appeared in the doorway, her presence steadying me. She nodded subtly, signaling that everything was proceeding as planned. The storm outside raged on, its howling winds mirroring the turmoil within the room. Brian's empire was crumbling before his eyes, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. The moment the federal agents entered Harlow's private dining room, the air seemed to crackle with electricity. Brian's face turned ashen as the lead agent read him his rights, each word a hammer blow to the facade he'd spent years building. His business partners, who had once laughed at his jokes and toasted his success, now scrambled for the exits like rats abandoning a sinking ship. "This isn't over," Brian hissed at me as they led him away in handcuffs, but the venom in his voice couldn't mask the fear flickering in his eyes. For the first time, I saw him not as the untouchable titan he pretended to be, but as a man unraveling before my very eyes. But Brian wasn't about to go quietly into the night. 2 days later, Andrea received an anonymous envelope containing a single photograph, her car parked outside her office, its license plate circled in red marker. Beneath it, scrawled in block letters, "Back OFF or else." My lawyer's calm demeanor didn't waver, but I noticed the way her hands tightened around the edges of the photo before slipping it into an evidence bag. "This is standard intimidation tactics," she said firmly, though her security detail doubled overnight. I tried to reassure myself that it was just a scare tactic, but the message hit closer to home when I woke up one morning to find my bank accounts frozen. A notice from the bank cited suspicious activity as the reason, though we both knew it was Brian's final attempt to control me through fear. That same week, disaster struck again. Flames engulfed my house in the early hours of the morning, the fire alarms blaring as thick smoke filled the air. Neighbors called 911. Their shouts mixing with the roar of the inferno consuming what had once been my sanctuary. Standing on the curb in my pajamas, wrapped in a blanket offered by a kind neighbor, I watched helplessly as firefighters battled the blaze. The arson investigators later confirmed what I already suspected: a Molotov cocktail had been thrown through my living room window. It was a crude yet terrifying escalation, a clear signal that Brian still wielded power even behind bars. Andrea wasted no time filing restraining orders and requesting protection for both of us. "He's panicking," she told me during an emergency meeting in her fortified office, her voice low but steady. "Men like Brian only know how to fight dirty, but they collapse under pressure." Still, the threats weighed heavily on me. Every creak in the hallway made me jump. Every unfamiliar car parked nearby set my heart racing. Yet amid the chaos, something unexpected began to take root within me: a fierce determination to survive, not just for myself, but for every woman who had ever been underestimated, dismissed, or silenced. When the police arrested two hired thugs attempting to vandalize Andrea's car, we finally had concrete proof of Brian's involvement. Their confession revealed a chilling plan: intimidate us into dropping the case, even if it meant silencing us permanently. But instead of breaking me, the danger only hardened my resolve. With Andrea's guidance, I secured temporary housing under an alias and began documenting everything in meticulous detail. Each threat, each act of sabotage, became another thread in the web that would ultimately entangle Brian forever. Just as I thought I had everything under control, life delivered a series of blows that tested my resolve in ways I never imagined. The first came during a routine checkup, a doctor's grave expression as he explained the biopsy results. Early-stage cancer. The words hit me like a freight train, but I refused to let them derail me. We caught it early, he said, trying to soften the blow. Treatment will give you a fighting chance. Fighting was something I understood all too well. If Brian thought my focus would waver, he was wrong. This diagnosis only fueled my determination to survive, not just physically, but emotionally and legally. Then came the call that shattered what little peace I had left. Claire, my sister, the one person who always believed in me, was gone. A car accident on an empty stretch of highway, ruled suspicious by investigators. Her death felt like losing a part of myself, but it wasn't grief alone that consumed me. It was anger. Anger at how far Brian would go to intimidate me, to strip away everyone I loved. At her funeral, I clutched the necklace she'd given me years ago, vowing to honor her memory by finishing what we'd started together. But Brian wasn't done yet. One evening, two masked men dragged me into a van as I walked home from the library. Panic surged through me, but clarity followed quickly. I knew this was Brian's doing. They drove me to an abandoned warehouse, their voices cold as they demanded I drop the case. Your husband doesn't want any surprises, one sneered. For hours, I sat in silence, calculating every move until Andrea's security team found me, thanks to the tracking device I'd secretly kept in my bag. When they burst in, guns drawn, relief washed over me, but so did fury. Brian had crossed another line, and now there was no turning back. The classroom buzzed with energy as I stood before my students at Riverside Community College, the chalkboard behind me filled with notes on The Great Gatsby. For the first time in years, I felt truly alive. What does Fitzgerald mean when he describes wealth as both a dream and a trap? I asked, watching their faces light up with curiosity. These moments, these raw, unfiltered exchanges about literature, were what Brian had dismissed as trivial. But here, surrounded by eager minds, I found purpose again. My maiden name, Marissa Lane, now signed neatly on my syllabus, marked not just a return to teaching but a reclamation of identity. Every Thursday evening, I hosted financial literacy workshops for women in the campus coffee shop. What began as informal chats evolved into structured sessions where stories of financial abuse, manipulation, and resilience unfolded over steaming cups of coffee. Knowledge is power, I told them during one session, projecting slides detailing how to spot red flags in shared finances. Vanessa, Brian's former mistress, became a regular attendee. At first, her presence unnerved me, a living reminder of betrayal, but she transformed into something unexpected, an ally. Together, we crafted exercises that helped participants decode predatory behavior in relationships, whether romantic or professional. Writing hidden in plain sight, A Woman's Guide to Financial Self-Defense became my catharsis. Each chapter drew from personal experience, how Brian underestimated me, how I documented his crimes, and how I reclaimed control. The publisher's initial skepticism melted away after early drafts sparked interest among advocacy groups. It's more than a book, they said. It's a movement. As chapters took shape, so did my resolve. This wasn't revenge, it was empowerment. Every word was a brick laid in the foundation of a life rebuilt without fear. Yet independence came with challenges. One afternoon, as I walked home from campus, a black sedan followed me through winding streets. My heart raced, memories of Brian's threats flooding back. When the car finally sped past, tires screeching, I realized this lingering fear would take longer to shed. But instead of retreating, I doubled down on self-defense classes and installed security cameras around my new apartment. Fear wouldn't dictate my life anymore. At night, I sat by the window, editing my manuscript under soft lamplight. Outside, the city pulsed with life, indifferent yet full of possibility. I no longer felt like the woman who once tiptoed around Brian's ego. That version of me was gone, replaced by someone stronger, wiser, and unapologetically herself. Teaching, writing, mentoring, each act was a declaration of freedom. And though Brian's trial loomed ahead, it no longer defined me. For the first time, I understood what it meant to live, not merely survive. Looking back, I realized the greatest lesson wasn't about revenge, it was about reclaiming myself. For 5 years, I let Brian define me. Too simple, too naive, too insignificant to challenge him. But those labels became my armor. Every time he dismissed me, every time he left incriminating documents in plain sight, he underestimated the power of observation, the same skill that made me love literature. Stories teach us to see patterns, to recognize the quiet moments before a storm. And in Brian's case, they revealed the cracks beneath his polished facade. The hardest part wasn't gathering evidence or enduring betrayal. It was learning to trust my own strength. When I stood at that table during our anniversary dinner, folder in hand, I wasn't just exposing Brian. I was proving to myself that I could no longer be silenced. The irony? His arrogance gave me everything I needed to dismantle him. If he'd ever truly listened when I talked about novels, he might have recognized how often hubris leads to downfall. Now, as I guide other women through their own battles, whether financial literacy or personal empowerment, I remind them of this truth. You are stronger than you've been told. Even when you feel invisible, your quiet resilience can become your greatest weapon.